Good morning, everyone. This is Satish from Newt Global. So I'm today's anchor for this webinar. Thank you so much for joining the session. We have so many participants join the session already, and let us wait for another quick 1 minute for others to join the session. All right, so time to start the session. So let me quickly take you through what Newt Global is all about in a quick minute, and followed by the introduction about today's speaker and some of the housekeeping instructions before we start the webinar. So Newt Global is a leader in DevOps transformation, test automation, and cloud enablement with globally delivery centers in US as well as in India. So we have premium labor partnerships with product companies, and currently we're serving some of the Fortune 50 companies across the globe. So as part of our Center of Excellence, we build frameworks and use these frameworks for all our customers, and this helps us to deliver faster, deliver our services faster. So delivering cost optimization, measurable ROI is consistently that we've been providing for the last decade. So today's speaker is Madhavan Srinivasan. He's a managing director with Newt Global. Madhavan is a serial entrepreneur with 3 ventures focused on networking and system integration, customer experience and interaction and management, and cloud computing. He was the founder CEO of G-Quotient, a niche player in the DevOps and cloud computing space, forged a strategic relationship with Newt Global. Newt Global recently acquired G-Quotient, and Madhavan holds the office of the managing director for the global pre-sales and solution sales for Newt Global. Here are some of the housekeeping instructions. All phones are set to mute, and by default you'll be in listen-only mode. If you have any questions, please type them in the chat window beside the presentation panel. So we will try to address all the questions during the end of the session. And if you are unable to cover any of the questions, we'll try to address them during an email. So thank you so much for the participation, and enjoy the session. Over to you, Madhavan.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. Can you all hear me? I suppose. Just give me a second. Let me switch to my screen. So the topic for today's session is about the linkage between cloud and DevOps. A lot of you would have heard about cloud and also about DevOps in different contexts. And there have been trends that have been tracked very closely by the technology industry as well as business enterprises over the last 5 to 10 years. But we see them at the crossroads today, because from being an experimental kind of initiative, for a lot of companies, they become mainstream business decisions. So I'm going to take you through a process of how the adoption has taken in the cloud space. Some of you may be already familiar with it, but I just want to recapitulate the process, and more importantly, use my insights on what this transforms into. Then talk about the maturity models based on what people have been able to come up with the adoption curve. Then there is a discussion about DevOps, and I'm going to merge the two at some point in time where you see the linkage between the two. And as a result, what is the business value you get from Synergies? And I will probably open the floor for questions at the end of it. As you all know, cloud is at the center stage right now. And for those of you who still believe cloud is evolutionary or revolutionary, the fact of the matter is it's already pervasive in the life of all of us. Nearly 50% of the enterprise have already adopted cloud in a significant manner. And the reasons are very simple to see. Cloud gives you flexible infrastructure to start with. What used to take provisioning from a data center, where you need to build huge ions of computing power, storage, and networking capacity, you're now depending on a provision that happens on demand. As a result, when the business needs to grow, you can add capacity on the fly, which is a great advantage because you don't have to plan for capacity build out like a typical CapEx model. And the beauty of cloud is that it's a centralized monitoring provisioning from one place, and it can be controlled across different locations. You also see the adoption of cloud throwing in a lot of application vendors with open source, and some of them built to enterprise class. They are trying to provide the products and service on the cloud. And this also enables you to take away from the vendor lock-in that most of us are used to from enterprise applications space. And last but not the least, it's a purely OpEx driven model, which obviously means you only pay for what you use. So this is the big benefit of adoption of cloud, and therefore it's no wonder the enterprises have migrated to cloud, given the fact that this gives them flexibility to grow as well as the agility to operate. If you take a look at the adoption scenario per se, some of the statistics which are from World Executive Council, obviously these are public domain information, but I just want to highlight the fact that most of us went for cloud adoption because it helped us to save on cost. Again, the pointer here is that cost as in the total cost of ownership. It's not about a cost of a part of the solution, but it's about the capex reduction, it's about the capacity utilization, it's about additional capacity addition, as well as about the overall network requirement that you need to have for proper access. So if you take the TCO as a whole, you will find over time the decision to move to cloud is a beneficial one. But the more important benefit you get is basically the flexibility you have in this infrastructure. We define flexibility as an ability to scale in and scale out as the business grows in or grows out. So opportunities for you to build a business without worrying about compute capacity or IT capacity from the day one is a big plus point. And this happens in a jiffy, meaning you will be able to do the provisioning at a much faster rate than what you take through a normal means of provisioning additional servers or additional storage capacity. From these operational benefits of cloud adoption, you primarily move to what we call strategic portfolio alignment. What really this means is when business enterprises are devoid of trying to worry about how to provision IT infrastructure, how to write applications which will reside in a pay-for-use model, how do you scale the business, the focus is more shifted to the strategy, which is to do their own business. And they can assess their business viability as well as growth, taking a model which is more flexible and not merely worry about the IT infrastructure that we need to carry through that. But it's also important to note what kind of use that people have for the cloud adoption. And to a large degree, people have used it for, basically the traditional payroll, accounting, financial management, all the backend functions to migrate to cloud. The reasons are simple to see, because these are applications that has less impact on the customer, but more on the internal customers. So therefore, anything to do with the external customer, the companies are still careful to move to the cloud. And of course, things like web hosting, which has been a traditional cloud offering, because most of our websites are running on a cloud, which is anyway the way email systems and web hosting keeps happening. But what's also important is that people are now trying to migrate their own software development process and the testing process into the cloud, which is an interesting spin. That's where the DevOps intersection will happen, as you can see in the previous and the later slides. What are some of the challenges that people face in adopting cloud? And I've tried to capture some of the key perspectives that come from different parts of the organization. You have a business organization which worries about top line, bottom line, growth, revenues, etc. And that is a process perspective, which is how this business is going to be acquired, delivered, and supported, and the people who support the process. And all of this has to be done in a fashion where there is an operations team which is very efficient and is able to manage with less resources. At the same time, providing a kind of comfort that it's all secure data, nothing is lost in the migration to cloud and things like that. So essentially, the business perspective has certain concern as much as other perspectives are. Primarily, all of them are worried about performance uncertainties. Let me define that. If you had a data center which had identified set of compute power and storage infrastructure as well as your application architecture, you tend to get a feeling that you are in control of the output in terms of performance, because whenever there is a slack in performance, you are able to provision more resources or try to tweak the application and try to get it in control. But the moment the control gets into cloud, which is usually considered outside of your perimeter, there is a doubt about how the performance will be. So that uncertainty is there with a lot of people. Then again, the security concern, the data that you have in your premise, if it moves to the cloud, whether it's secure at the rest portion or in the data and the motion, or when it's going to be at a phase it's stored in the cloud infrastructure. The IT guys are generally worried about database migration. It's understandable because databases are probably the core of all business applications today. And vendors who have provided solid database solutions have kept them working all the time. And any disturbance to the database in any form is a recipe for disaster. So people are very wary of moving database to the cloud yet, though there are solutions available which we can talk about. Then there is a question of availability. Again, this is a myth, but it still is valid to know about it, because if in the event your provisioning infrastructure from the cloud goes down for some reason which is not necessarily your own creation, how do you run the business? Honestly, it has happened in the past couple of times when Amazon Web Service went down or a Google Cloud went down, but then they were able to recover quickly. But there's still a loss of business continuity. So there are ways to attack this even within the cloud architecture, and therefore people are getting over this fear. The most important thing which I think we somehow underplay is the fact that applications themselves are not ready to migrate to cloud. What it means is when you write an application, in the traditional sense, you would have written for a mainframe, which expects all the transactions to happen at a central place, and the clients being a very thin, powerless client. Then all the way move to client server where the load is distributed between client machines and the server infrastructure. And again, there's a middleware layer which came in for transaction throughput. You know, these various types of architecture you wrote the applications have to move to a scenario where all the infrastructure that you want is from the cloud, it's virtual machines, not necessarily close to you, but up in the cloud. And you have to have a network pipe which will connect it all the time. And you have all your storage boxes, servers, compute, everything on the cloud. And more importantly, the dependencies of the application, the interaction between various application components, now you suddenly have to move all of them to cloud. So unless your application is re-architected or looked at from this context of performance, you are really not more ready to move to cloud. And this is an area where a lot of people are taking different approaches. Some may want to do lift and shift, which is basically to migrate the application as they are, hoping that nothing breaks in the cloud. Some people want to refactor the application to have selected improvements and then try to overcome any performance issues that might face. And of course, there are people who are very bold to get the cloud native architecture, as they say, which is to rewrite the application. Now one shoe fits all, and that is something we need to keep in mind. Business owners definitely need agility and cost containment, which is where they are trying to look at cloud as an option. Who would not be happy with the fact that he's able to release products faster or go to market faster, but yet the cost is manageable. The operations guy, who are the people who keep the lights on, as they say, they require availability and manageability right through, because in the event of a failure or the potential failure, they need to be able to recover it really quick. They're worried about that aspect of cloud. The CIOs generally want security because their job is on the line if something breaks from security point of view, as well as process compliance, which is to say that every part of the IT systems work the way it's supposed to be designed and managed to work. And of course, the HR has an angle to do this, because the internal people who want to support the cloud infrastructure need to be reskilled, and therefore they need to be employable, because that's when the progression of career happens for them. If you look at the maturity model, which is basically a representative kind of thing, for lack of anything, we put that 3-4 stage process. But literally most companies go through these phases in different forms. Then there are people who experiment it as a proof of concept, then create a clear strategy based on what they want to do, and then adopt a major migration plan, and finally have a model which is completely on cloud. And sometime back we saw a slide which talked about nearly 50% of the people are already on the cloud. 26% of them are completely on cloud, another 20% of them are almost 70% in the cloud. So which is the kind of attraction that you see in the cloud migration. So what we normally classify organizations from a cloud sensitivity point of view is that there are companies which are cloud aware, which means they know the technology involved and they know the kind of options available. But then they purely look at it from technology angle, which is to say, if I were to move to cloud from a physical data center, these are the elements of technology I should look for, or tech stack as they call. Then there is a second type of organization which is a little more mature and advanced, is the one who looked at cloud enabled organization, where irrespective of whatever technology you use, my process become more efficient. I'm able to achieve things faster, better, and able to produce results in a fashion where it is traceable. So this is a process conscious organization. But the most important one would be the cloud native organization, which is to say I derive business value from cloud migration. These are the ones who basically will adopt cloud as a end-to-end business strategy. And all the born in the cloud companies like your Salesforce.com or Facebook or all the new companies are all in the cloud native stage. And that's why they realize the best value out of whatever cloud adoption they have taken. The business value from cloud, from a very generic point of view, is that most people think that the cost of individual service is obviously something which will be taken from the cloud services. Again, there are a lot of dashboards and reports that can be taken from the console of AWS or any other cloud provider. The other thing is basically some multi-functional, multi-business unit organization will also want to have a chargeback mechanism, which means that if each of you had a department budget in the past, you're going to have a departmental sharing of cost, which will be charged back to you based on certain formula that they adopt. And sometimes people say they don't report anything to the cloud, meaning whatever happens to the cloud is a big kind of mystery that's happening, but it's still giving some value, but not necessarily split into cost and sharing with other units, etc. So they end up doing definitely a lump of the cost and say this is the total cost of what I'm spending on cloud. So this is a different way to look at cloud, because the business value, the more granular you go about cloud adoption, the better for you to see how it has helped you. Because if you take a physical data center, you probably have all cost elements tabulated and know exactly where what is happening. And you're able to find out how effective you have managed to utilize the data center or the resources. But once you're into a pool called cloud and everything is pay for usage, you don't have the granular visibility sometimes. That's something which is inevitable. But given all this complexity, still most people, business enterprise, look for financial benefits on the cloud adoption, and that's a metric they want to track, which means how much of money they're spending with respect to how much of return they're getting. They want to look at the cost of IT services, which includes infrastructure cost, application maintenance cost, licensing cost, and even support costs. And they also look at savings from physical to cloud kind of thing. So if you look at everything about business value coming from IT is a metric that you derive from current model of working to a new cloud model. Let's switch here to DevOps. Again, I want to just take this into two parts, because DevOps has come from a different approach, but eventually merged with the cloud kind of technologies with whatever they've built over a period of time. But it's also interesting to know how they evolved from where they were to where they are today. Okay. The most important thing in a DevOps adoption for the enterprise is to ask a few serious questions, because DevOps in a way is neither a tool nor a technology or service. It's actually a culture. So a lot of these things have to be adopted internally to be successful. So there are types of companies which are called high IT performers, which basically are companies which require very high throughput of delivery of software. They don't look at too much of rework. It is built right for the first time, and look at highly motivated employees. They are the high IT performers. And there are companies which are moderate, but they have a lot of gain they have by reducing the technical debt, which is rework and things like that, and therefore the speed becomes more when they release products. And of course, there are low IT performers who are laggards, but they have the most opportunity to improve everything about delivery process. And these are the type of customers who are looking at DevOps. Let's put in one side. So the question to ask is, does DevOps bring business value? Here, in the shorter run, you may find it difficult to experiment with a lot of new tools and the way the tools work and automate a lot of process. Therefore, it has to be a long-term benefit that you should play for. Also, the question is it flexible enough to your IT flexible enough? Meaning, there are silos within the IT function which doesn't allow adoption of DevOps because everybody has a preserve of their own territory. Therefore, collaboration becomes an essential part of DevOps to succeed. The most important criteria is about the size of the company. Now, how big should a company be to adopt DevOps? A question that keeps coming up. Now, a lot of companies starting from startups of 5, 10, 50, 100 people to a large enterprise of 10,000 to 20,000 employees have all adopted DevOps at varying levels of success and degrees of success through the process. But what is important is people basically have to look at usage of applications which are not generally off the shelf, basically, right? And they need to look at applications which need to be customized, which need to be improved upon, which need to be upgraded, etc. And they get the best benefit out of a DevOps implementation, because the COTS users generally get all this increased releases, etc., done by the provider. COTS here is the off-the-shelf software. Okay, then the size of the company, which is usually kind of sweet spot for DevOps succeed, is 250 people. It can go 100, 150, 200, whatever the number, but it's a mid-sized organization. The important thing for you to adopt DevOps is after some diligence has been done, which is to make sure that it's not all or nothing. Meaning, if you do DevOps, everything will change tomorrow is a wrong expectation. Nor it is also wrong to expect that if we don't do DevOps, things will not happen. So you have to have a balance of how the DevOps strategy has to be implemented. And finally, the most important thing is everything about DevOps is a kind of journey. You start off in one place, you end up in a completely different area, and the whole benefit can be accrued if it's a continuous commitment. So that's really what the story about DevOps. Let's look at the IT operations in the pre-DevOps era. On the left side, what you see is basically a typical IT infrastructure organized in the form of layers. We have the hardware layer at the bottom, the networks which are getting virtualized. Then there is the storage, which is also getting virtualized. The computer is already virtualized, and there is a set of cloud operations tools that are being provided, right? Which is the cluster manager or load balancer, multi-tenancy, or any monitoring, etc. Now, all of these are in the cloud world today. Trust me, these are happening in the cloud world, and therefore, the operations of IT without DevOps, even in the cloud world, operates like a silo. To give the model on the right side, there is basically, you have data protection, security, all aspect of operations, and the performance management, all within a boundary which happens in a sequential or a kind of mode where it is all stacked up. But that's really what it is happening as of today. But the moment you go to a DevOps kind of an organization, you find the model shifts actually. The IT model itself is changed into one where there's a constant improvement that happens through a life cycle of application, where your planning and the measurement of every stage of sort of code creation to code check-in to testing the code to deploying it is all through an automated pipeline, which obviously helps you to produce faster rates of release, at the same time a more thorough coverage of all the build and test process. On the right side, you have the traditional infrastructure, which is equivalent of a cloud. I've taken the example of a premise deployment where there is a virtualization that's shown here, and the VMs are running each of this application. So when you move to the DevOps mode of working, you see on the right, the way things will be managed is basically on a structure which is far more simple, which is basically an automation integration platform that controls all the legacy application, the cloud services that are being provisioned, the database that are being managed, and all the app service that goes along. And everything is managed through a orchestration layer with appropriate integration, management of API, etc. And there is a portal which helps you to sort of utilize these services. And that's the beauty of the whole thing. It becomes more self-service oriented. Therefore, most of the organizations, IT admin staff, lose their power, so to speak, but then they become more productive in terms of monitoring the performance of the application or IT infrastructure. So this is the transformation that happens in the DevOps world. Now, therefore, if you look at it, the cloud is actually an integral part of this transformation, because without cloud, obviously, you are still going to have hundreds of VMs which are going to manage anyways. So that you cannot escape, right? From our perspective, we looked at DevOps adoption at different enterprises, and we call them as initial adopters, committed adopters, and pervasive adopters. Basically, we are saying maturity on DevOps happens over a period of time. where typically if you're in exploratory stage, you're looking at very low frequency of application releases, not too much of change requests that keeps happening every other day, and you have a reasonable amount of time to get a product up and running if there is a failure. I'm saying these are all characteristic of a low intensity DevOps companies, but then they are initial stage. They're exploring the DevOps implementation. The current reason would be to become more responsive. Then you go to the next set of kind of people who have done the DevOps or at least committed to providing DevOps. They typically have once a week releases, which means they need to do the build and test and release process every other week. And there will be change requests that keeps coming, and therefore they need to take care of changes and the rollout of changes. And usually they expect a less than a day turnaround for MTTR. That's mean time to repair. It could be even a matter of few hours as well, but then typically it's less than a day. These companies are definitely evolving as a DevOps company, and they become more responsible because every other stage of their process is now depending on how well they're able to quickly respond with automation with a DevOps process. But the pervasive organization are the ones that basically use a mature DevOps process. They become very agile. The characteristic, they have multiple releases in a day. In fact, sometimes there are few hours as well, and they have change requests coming by the hour, and they have typically less than an hour or even less for MTTR. So all the SaaS product companies which are running hundreds of users using their software as a service subscriptions have to really respond within a matter of minutes or seconds to be able to recover if there is a failure in service. And they also have requests which keep coming from different customers through the day for changes which have to be committed over a period of time. So if you look at DevOps adoption of the enterprises, the most mature companies are the ones which have a pervasive culture for DevOps, which cuts across the various functions of the organization. Looking at the maturity curve in a slightly different fashion, the DevOps adoption has basically a feed forward, feed backward mechanism where you get an early warning from to the developer based on operational issues. That's the biggest advantage of being a DevOps enabled company. You don't wait for the problem to occur in the production and then start working to resolve the issues and reacting more. And also when you keep getting this information on a regular basis on what performs at what stage of efficiencies and what response times, you indirectly develop KPIs for the developers to improve every time. So the new releases can be either faster or better tested and things like that. And most of the time, the quality, as they say, at the end of the cycle of delivery, if it's at the customer end, will be the most expensive. So you need to trap the quality issues much earlier, and therefore the enhanced quality would be coming because at every critical moment you're capturing the sort of state of performance. The other thing which is interesting is something which comes out of a DevOps implementation is that you have the advantage of now provisioning services which are business critical ahead of some routine services, and especially with cloud being a platform for delivery, you can do it more effectively. So that's the advantage of DevOps which is adopted. And obviously, when you do implementation, you should look at the 80-20 rule because not every applications are so critical for you to move the DevOps way. So you may want to take a second step at them, but then the most critical application have to be looked at fairly seriously. And very important to establish criteria for you to perform, evaluate the performance of that, and also create visibility right through the release cycle. The dashboard that will give you what's happening at each stage of DevOps, implementation. There are a lot of tools available, hundreds of open source tools available for each of the processes, CI/CD pipelines creation, release automation. You have infrastructure as code, different kinds of tools available, but you need to consolidate the tool on a set of identified tool sets which help you to progress as opposed to keep looking at different tools which are the latest and the greatest. The more important thing is every time you use a tool or a process that uses the tool, you need to develop insights from the use of the tool through analytics, which will help you to improve the performance of the tool itself in the next time around. And always build a DevOps chain that is scalable in the future because you never know your operations can become much larger than what it is today. Therefore, you need to look at scalability of the entire DevOps implementation. This is a crossroad. If you step back and look at the state of cloud adoption today, there are different migration options possible, right? You have companies which are saying, I'm happy to do the rehosting, which is lift and shift as they call. so that the application still runs the way it is. I don't need to do any improvements. I just keep running it as long as it's working without having to fix it. Now, this is a safe approach. Again, not all the application will migrate to cloud. You still need to look at some amount of tweaking, some amount of changes, which is where refactoring and revision of the code comes in. And that helps them to go on a little more optimal utilization of cloud, because its performance characteristics are very different, as well as utilization of resources. But a more defined approach will be to redesign or rebuild the code, which is based on the tech stack that is currently running to the tech stack that will give the best output in the cloud era. That's a redesign and rebuild. Now, this is a very kind of involved process. Most companies will not venture into this until they're absolutely sure about the application itself, or in some cases, the application is written in a tech stack that is already modernized. Therefore, they're in a position to migrate them simply into the cloud world. Otherwise, you do migration after the modernization being completed. Replace, of course, is not an option for most, but it can be an option for some people who want to say, look, enough of the current application, but I want to build a new solution around cloud. Therefore, I want to buy completely new software. And these decisions are taken by much smaller companies because they have nothing to lose as a legacy. On the other side, if you look at the DevOps current scenario, there is infrastructure as code, which obviously is a common thing that DevOps gives a benefit. Then there's CI, continuous integration, continuous deployment, as well as continuous monitoring, because at the end of the day, you need to monitor the performance. See the interlinks between the two. Whatever be the migration option you choose, you will eventually try to implement them in a fashion where it's running in the cloud infrastructure with continuous development and release cycles happening, so that you're in a position to sort of release much faster, as well as look at infrastructure creation on the fly, because scalability, availability, all that becomes critical factors. So I'm going to take a little bit forward on the DevOps metrics, because we talked about some business metrics for cloud, but to define DevOps metrics is far more involved, because it involves a process, it involves automation, it involves people actually. So the business value from DevOps has been articulated by many people through a sample survey is that they're still trying to evaluate what could be the percentage of benefit they're getting out of current implementation. They're already seeing it, and then what they expect to see over the future, right? So basically, across multiple platforms, if software is made available, yeah, DevOps gives me a facility or a flexibility, and therefore I'm trying to see the benefit. It's something 30% of the people say. The other 60% are still willing to wait and find out what's the real benefit out of that. Increased collaboration, again, is a very important aspect of DevOps, where all the functions which are disparate, which are silos, have to work together to make it successful. And again, nearly 40% of the people have said they're seeing the benefit, but otherwise, still people are waiting for some more improvements to come before they can give the verdict on that. But if you look at average, anywhere between 30 to 40% is where people have seen the benefits already, which is not a bad situation, because DevOps is really only 4 or 5 years old. But the rest of the percentage of people are still waiting for how they're going to improve each of these aspects. They are very important. For example, a number of people working on a particular deployment services, as opposed to the number of people that are priority in testing. How do they rebalance the workforce in terms of the roles they play, and therefore get the best benefit from the reassignment of roles? What most people have agreed, and I think it's important to know, that DevOps definitely gives you agility in terms of releasing the product much faster, because the release cycles are much shorter than a typical waterfall or a sequential mode of product development and release. So every time you release a sort of new release which is tested and then rolled out at a much faster rate, you're going to basically reduce the time to get revenues, which eventually is going to give you benefit with DevOps. So that's the graph that you see on the right side. There is an equation of some sort which we can create. Again, these are notional. There's a company, there's an organization called DevOps Research that is doing a lot of work on this metrics for the DevOps, and I picked it up from them. So just to highlight the point, DevOps is actually evolving into a fairly serious metric-driven, sort of transformation. So what is the first thing that they see? They see if companies don't have a DevOps culture or a DevOps implementation, generally they tend to allow problems to creep through different stages, and they discover that bugs are to be fixed, and there's a lot of rework that happens. Now, if you aggregate the number of reworks for every product over a period of 1 year, it's going to be a significant amount of effort. Now that would actually determine the number of people involved in fixing these issues, and typically their cost, and the fact that the benefits of trying to improve that will be there. But the most important thing, the amount of time they spend on unnecessary work which is not productive. So this is a key factor. So essentially, if you see, it is possible to get definite returns out of avoiding cost of unnecessary rework, which is to say that I will reduce the cost of unnecessary rework using DevOps, and therefore I'm going to get the business benefit out of that. This is one key metric of business value of DevOps. There's another business value that one can see from implementation of DevOps is that if I had released those people who are not required for the rework and they are available as technically qualified, capable people, they can be invested into building new features. Therefore, the investment is a reinvestment of the resources and the skills. And that will also reduce the number of hours required to build a new feature. Therefore, it is indirectly recovering the time from wastage to providing insights into newly developed features. And these are revenue generating, by the way, because the way the agile operation work, as you all know, is to create minimum value product at every point in time, so that there's a direct revenue benefit that comes out of these releases. So essentially, the equation goes that revenue generating feature that we're talking about is actually another combination of how many releases you make which are experimental, which need to be proved in the market per line of business, into the number of lines of business, as well as success rate of these ideas multiplied by the impact of the idea, which is to say how much of revenue it can potentially generate, and of course the size of the business. If you look at all these individual components, you get a summation of potential value added from reinvestment in new feature, which obviously means the wastage that we see in the rework is put into building new feature, which is going to impact the revenues. Very useful DevOps metric. Again, once you have a metric defined and you are able to collect these statistics at different points in time, at different levels of DevOps implementation, you could come up with the potential business value metrics which can be tracked and which can be improved upon. A third benefit of DevOps which we see is basically the cost of downtime per year. This is very important because the operations people who have so far been in the wrong end of the stick or really making an issue out of frequent releases coming without being tested, or the change request that happens is not been fully implemented, it fails, and again I take more time to restore this infrastructure, and therefore the cost of outage is there. So this is a summation of all the different things that could give you cost of downtime per year. Now, it is possible for you to reduce all of it by avoiding downtime or reducing downtime, because deployment frequency and the failure rate as well as MTTR is all managed out of DevOps. And DevOps as a cycle will give you benefits of releasing shorter cycles of product as well as tested through automation. Then you also have a look ahead kind of thing where you test the whole thing in the production or a pre-production environment, so you're in a position to recover quickly when there is a failure or rollback. And all of this would mean lower outage. So if you really look at it, the cost of downtime per year is another important element of DevOps success. So if you try to combine the business value from adoption of cloud, adoption of DevOps in different parts of the organization, and then try to arrive at a common benefit which is related to revenue. Again, so far we've been talking about in the cloud scenario, reduction of cost, TCO reduction, financial benefits, etc. While in the DevOps we talked about a lot of efficiency improvements, trying to do things faster, try to do things better, and also make sure that the release throughput increase, etc. So eventually the business will now to have a positive impact on the revenue, though they don't unnecessarily avoid put down the value of cost reduction. They are more tuned to looking at revenue improvement. So the potential revenue upside is the real benefit that you can see if you combine the cloud adoption and the DevOps as two integral part of the organization initiatives. There are a few things that are evident. Now, when the business grows, you need to scale the business. Therefore, auto scalability that is provided from cloud inherently gives you that kind of safety, factor of safety, that you can really grow faster, and therefore you're in a position to spin off instances or put machines at much faster rate at a lower cost. Higher availability. It has been proved today that most of the mature cloud platforms have got enough kind of availability features built in, through clustering architecture to zoning architecture. Therefore, they are in a position to provide you uninterrupted business continuity. These are two significant benefits coming out of cloud adoption today, in addition to everything else that I talked about. If you add to that the deployment frequency per se, which is what the DevOps will give you as some benefit of all the reduction of cycle time for fixing bugs, building the product itself, and building a pipeline for release, etc., you will eventually get a potential revenue upside. So in some sense, an adoption of cloud products, cloud solutions, as well as the DevOps kind of way of doing things will give you significantly higher benefits through synergies. And that's the argument. So the integration of cloud and DevOps happens at an operational level, at a technology level, as well as at a financial level at some point in time. So my argument here today is that so far we've been looking at DevOps and cloud at two sets of initiatives which are parallel, which are running parallel tracks. At the same time, we're trying to demystify each one of them in our own way. But for more evolved enterprises, you will see that adopting the cloud itself can be done through DevOps methodology or a DevOps way of doing things, which will give double the benefit. And eventually, when the operations are on the cloud, you are better equipped to handle the performance issues. That's really what I had to share as part of the sort of seminar today. I just would like to take any questions that comes your way, and we can take the Q&A session now.
Yeah, thanks, Madhavan. If you have any questions, please type in the chat window beside the presentation panel, and we'll try to address the questions. Okay, so here is a question. How a mid-sized ISV adapted a SaaS business model and hosted in the cloud will be able to benefit from the DevOps? And note, we have a release frequency of 1 month.
Okay, so the business model per se is SaaS, and it's a mid-sized company, an independent software vendor. That's a good background. But what is important is that how frequent is your customer expectation for releases in terms of feature additions, in terms of new enhancements, etc. You may want to release it at a 1 month frequency because you think the customers either don't need so much changes or the product is so stable. But the day you have to make changes to meet the customer requirement, and adopting a DevOps kind of chain will help you to do it faster, because at a certain frequency it doesn't become so advantageous for you. If you're able to manage your expectation of customers within a monthly releases, then you're still okay to do with whatever current thing you're doing. But then if it goes beyond that, for you to release much faster, and then therefore you need to do the entire build process, test process, you will need to look at DevOps as a significant value addition to your process.
Right. So here is one more question. So are there any metrics today when we talk about the potential savings by implementing DevOps?
Yeah, the metrics in DevOps are evolving, and numbers are hard to get because the way it's been done right now is each company has decided to go the DevOps way by choosing a set of tools first. Again, this is the problem that most companies have faced, that the tools drive the output rather than the way tools have been chosen. So there are companies which have tried to do an assessment before going to DevOps, and therefore they're trying to pick the tools which are more appropriate. So the cost of tool plus the cost of training and implementation, if they are documented, then they're able to get a sense of how much of cost it will take to implement DevOps. The way the benefits will accrue is that over a period of time, with all this cost, are you able to improve the release cycles by a factor of, let's say, 3 times, 2 times? Are you able to reduce the number of defects by 40–50% because your code coverage is much better? Or you're able to create infrastructure on the fly because you don't have to wait for a provisioning to happen through hours of request to a sysadmin kind of person. Now, if you had all of these productivity improvements, then you'll come at a figure which is saying that for having saved so much of time, increasing throughput, etc., I'm spending so much money. Some kind of ratio will come. Right now, it's still evolutionary, but I think there are a lot of people doing work on providing sample metrics for each type of organization.
So I think so we have with this we have reached the end of the session. So we have some more questions, but we'll try to address them or an email sometime by today or tomorrow. So you will be receiving a video recording as well as a slide deck later today by evening, and with this we are going to conclude the session.
Thank you all for being on the session, and I appreciate your time on that.
Thanks, everyone.